Good morning, everybody. This is class 10. It's on my notes. We've been doing this a little bit of a while and don't have that much time left to go with the class. We'll do 2 more after this is what's on the schedule. And there's so much more material we could cover. It's amazing. You know, when Venerable, when we set up this arrangement that I would be doing these classes, she said, "Do you think you can finish Refuge in 12 weeks?" And I said, "Well, no, but that's probably all I'm capable of." But truthfully, we could go on for weeks and weeks and weeks. There's so much richness and so much depth, and it's just a real privilege to be able to take this material into retreat. So I know that's been everybody's experience just from the people who have come to the Q&As and spoke at the go-around the other day. So we'll keep going. We'll just keep going with Refuge, and the people online will just be starting their retreat from afar in another few weeks. So anyway, it's a privilege to share this together. So again, we'll do what we have been doing, starting with a few minutes of silence, a few minutes to bring our minds, settle them, bring them here. I'll do a very brief description of the visualization. You've all been doing it for a while, so just enough to remind you of key points. We'll do the recitations, and then we'll do the talk today on the distinctions of the 3 jewels, and also starting on the precepts of taking refuge. So, take your mind to your breath. And even from the first moment of sitting, bring the Buddha to mind. It's like coming to be with friends. We begin our session with that mind, then we're already on the right start. And as Venerable Tarpa skillfully and joyfully laid out the 6 preparatory practices, you can do those in your mind as well. And some of them we'll do in the recitations too. And by way of motivation this morning, in volume 4, Following in the Buddha's Footsteps, volume 4 of the Library of Wisdom and Compassion, His Holiness the Dalai Lama gives us this example. He says, the Buddha advised his disciples that when fear or terror arose in them, for example, when they lived alone in the forest, they should recollect the awakened one's qualities. And then he quotes from the Pali Sutras, "For when you recollect me, monastics," said the Buddha, "whatever fear or trepidation or terror you may have will be abandoned." His Holiness goes on, if they could not recollect the Buddha, he instructed them to recollect the Dharma. And if that was not possible, he instructed them to recollect the Sangha. And the same benefits will accrue. Whatever fear or trepidation or terror you may have will be abandoned. So this brings to mind the potency of the Dharma, the Buddha's direct guidance. When you have fear or terror, think of me. We are advised at the time of death, if we can bring the Buddha to mind, that will ease our mind and guide us through the next steps of our journey. And of course, this practice is done by cultivation, cultivating repetition, bringing the Buddha and the Buddha's qualities, the Dharma's qualities, the Sangha's qualities to mind again and again and again, so that we are so familiar, our mind automatically goes to the three jewels for refuge. And as I think of all the fear, the terror that's going on in the world today, trepidation, it's going on all the time. But right now we have some big world crises that make this all the more apparent, of the atrocities committed in Israel and the retaliatory suffering that's happening in Palestine, the atrocities done by soldiers in from Russia and Ukraine, the Ukrainian retaliatory behaviors, and just the fact that war exists at all. Sufferings in the streets, sufferings of poverty, the gross sufferings of starvation all over the world. Fear and trepidation as people watch their water rise, their homes float away in different parts of the world, and it's happening here too. And how many of these beings have this medicine? When you recollect me, monastics, the Buddha said, whatever fear or trepidation or terror you may have will be abandoned. So as we do our practice, as we think about why, it isn't per se to grow up and be able to convert the whole world to the Buddha Dharma. It's not that. What it is about cultivating the qualities of the Buddha, seeing all three jewels as our refuge, recognizing how we can realize these qualities in our own mind with the Dharma, how we rely on those who have done it before us with the Sangha. And practice in order to be able to share these resources in a skillful way, here and now, in our own future lives, and to become Buddha so that we know skillfully how to teach beings to rely on a refuge that really can eliminate all fear. And in this season where there's lots of prayers about peace on earth, goodwill to humans, may we practice in order to bring this medicine, to bring that about in the most skillful way. So let's enhance the visualization that you maybe already have of the Buddha in the space in front. On a large golden throne, seated on a higher throne in the center, smaller one. Visualize his body made of light, his posture in meditation pose as a monastic. See Maitreya, Buddha, on his right on another throne. and a Sangha at his feet, the entire lineage of lamas in the tradition of the vast. The method side of the path. On his left is Manjushri with his flaming sword, also seated on a throne. At his feet and surrounding him, Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, and so forth, all the lamas of the profound view, the profound path. Behind him, Vajradhara, blue, surrounded by the lineage lamas, the blessings of the practice. Before him, also on a throne, before the Buddha, your own root spiritual teacher and all the teachers that you have received Dharma from, appearing in ideal, ordinary forms, in the mudra of giving teachings and looking at you with tremendous love. Surrounding them, all the meditational deities are still on the throne, but now all the way around these central thrones. These meditational deities, those that you're familiar with, bring them vividly to mind as they take their place in that circle. And then the row of Buddhas around them, circle all the way around them. The Bodhisattvas around them. The two rows of Arhats around them. Dakas and Dakinis around them. And the supramundane Dharma protectors around them. And the four guardian kings in the four directions off the throne, Dharma protectors as well. And ourselves surrounded by living beings in every direction, each one of whom has exhibited a kindness to us that we can even imagine and mostly can't remember. Even the kindnesses of this life we so easily forget. But out of that appreciation of their kindness, recognizing our own wish to repay that, out of our fondness and appreciation for each one, and with delight leading them in their recitations. As we imagine much blessing coming from the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and so forth in the space in front. Namo Gurubhya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Gurubhya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Gurubhya, Namo Buddhaya. Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sangaya. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by engaging in generosity and the other far-reaching practices, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by engaging in generosity and the other far-reaching practices, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by engaging in generosity and the other far-reaching practices, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings not be separated from sorrowless bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind, and present clouds of every type of offering, actual and mentally transformed. I confess all my destructive actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the virtues of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until cyclic existence ends, and turn the wheel of Dharma for sentient beings. I dedicate all the virtues of myself and others to the Great Awakening. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, foreland, sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you. May all beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. So visualizing, really refreshing your visualization of the merit refuge field in the space in front. Recite the refuge formula fully a few times, and then do some recitation of whichever one or all four that you're particularly focusing on right now. Do that silently, first imagining that white light is pouring from that particular aspect of the field, purifying all negativities in relation to them, and then turning into a golden light, which brings the realizations of their particular aspects. Namo Guruvya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Guruvya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Guruvya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Guruvya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya. Namo Guruvya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Guruvya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Guruvya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya. Sin shared something in Leading the Motivation yesterday morning or a couple of mornings ago. Now that we're doing the practice together in the chapel, which is very lovely to be there. Nice to share it with her. But I thought, oh, we should all hear this, every one of us. It's from Pambankam Rinpoche, and he's commenting on the benefits of taking refuge, which we'll cover next week. But he's really addressing this issue of the difference between reciting the refuge formula and bringing it to mind. He says, when you take refuge, don't merely repeat the same words as other people or take refuge only verbally. Take refuge from your heart. He says, people these days say, you must recite the refuge formula a certain number of times. People who say instead, you must develop it on your mind stream are rare. So what he's saying here is 100,000 is a nice goal, but our obsession with just completing 100,000 mantras is, well, he doesn't say that's not taking refuge properly, does it? Yes. You become a Buddhist only when you develop the act of taking refuge properly. Reciting the refuge formula hundreds of thousands of times does not make you a Buddhist. So the practice really is, as much as we can get into the counting, and as much as I was advocating that we do, if we have the will to inspire ourselves to keep going by keeping track of that number, it's also really, really important that we do it the way that the refuge comes into our mind stream. And he tells a story. In Dakpo once, a monk named Atar was doing a retreat with friends in which they were to recite the refuge formula a certain number of times. Atar gave proper thought to the meaning behind taking refuge, and so he fell behind the others. They were much quicker because they only repeated the words of the refuge formula. They had nearly completed 1 billion repetitions. Fearing that Atar would not complete the required number, they asked him how many he had done. And Atar said, have you only been totting up some number for the refuge formula? So if you recite the formula while keeping your attention on taking refuge, you will be significantly ripened by it. So that's the advice. Just totting up the number ain't the practice. And it's easy to get there when we get, closer to the goal, So anyway, I thought that was a good thing to share at this point in the retreat. And also for the, also my friend who's worried about the number, can we do this number? That's not the point. It's not the point. So the Lamrim outline, more or less, we've been following the Lamrim Chenmo outline. With some diversions and directions a little bit from the way Venerable Chögyam and His Holiness the Dalai Lama are guiding us in the Library of Wisdom and Compassion. So the first point in that Lamrim outline in Lamrim Chenmo, causes of going for refuge, we've covered many times, but we need to keep bringing it to mind many times because we forget. Second point, based on that, the objects to which you go for refuge. So identifying the objects and the reason why they are worthy objects of refuge. We reflect on that, we've covered that. Third is the way you go for refuge. First, point A is going for refuge by knowing the good qualities, which we have also covered, not as extensively as we could have. There's just so much more to look at about the good qualities of the Buddha in particular. So much, and I hoped we'd get back to it, but I'm not sure we're going to. But use these resources to keep thinking about the good qualities of the Buddha again and again and again, because there's so much there to reflect on, to especially people who have trouble relating to the far, far away Buddha. The more we look at these different ways of having expressed what the Buddha's qualities are, I think the clearer it will be in our minds what the relationship is. So today we're going to the next point of going for refuge by knowing the distinctions between these different three. So in one of the Lamrim texts, it's put up as a question from, as Venerable Children calls him, Joe Blow. One Mouth says, each of the three jewels has so many qualities. Is it sufficient to take refuge in just one? I mean, the lists are long, let's admit that. And it's easy, I think, to get our refuge ideas, okay, three jewels, get them all smushed together. So this practice of taking them out to look at the different qualities and the different distinctions between them, I think is really rich. It really gives us lots of clarity about what exactly it is that we're taking refuge in. So, you know, what do you think? If each of the three jewels has so many qualities, is it sufficient to take refuge in only one? I mean, we'd like to, maybe, but the answer is no. The answer is no. And so here are the different distinction qualities that we'll look at, and we'll talk about them a bit together. So it's the distinction based on their defining characteristics, the distinction based on their enlightened activities, the distinction based on devotion, that's the word that's translated in Lamrim Chenmo, the distinction based on practice, the distinction based on recollection, and the distinction based on how they increase merit. So they all have different characteristics. And, you know, Geshe Sopa, in his talking about this, he says, so because they each have different characteristics, we actually approach each one in a slightly different way. And that's a nice thing to hold clearly in our minds. So right off the bat, the distinguishing characteristic of the Buddha, well, what do you think it is? Yeah, it's Buddha's perfect enlightenment. I mean, that's a pretty distinguishing characteristic from every other phenomenon, right? The omniscient mind of the Buddha. The Buddha is the one who's abandoned all defects. The Buddha generally, right? All Buddhas have abandoned all defects, have cultivated all good qualities to the absolute maximum. They perceive the two truths simultaneously. Their mind never leaves deep meditation on the nature of reality, the ultimate nature, at the same time knowing all the varieties of phenomena. And as Venerable Sepel gave it, you know, just speaking very briefly about the value of meditating on the 10 qualities of the Buddha in her motivation for the Tara Puja last night, we can see that when we really think about them, they come alive. There's a richness that makes the Buddha's distinctions, you think, amazing, that there is a mind like this. We can still question, is there really such a thing? Not out of sort of a cynical view, but a question, is there such a thing, so that we use that question to motivate ourselves to keep investigating. Because, as we mentioned the other day, the proof is there. Because the next one is the defining characteristic of the Dharma is what? Huh? True cessations, true paths. That's the defining characteristic. It is the result of the Buddha's enlightenment, on one hand. The Dharma is the result of the Buddha's enlightenment in that those are the realizations the Buddha has, and then transmits them so that we can also follow along the path. As Geshe Sopa also said, I think I mentioned this before, this is also a chicken and egg situation, because we become Buddha by relying on the Dharma. But in this case, the defining characteristic of the Dharma is defined as it being the result of the Buddha's enlightenment. So it's what the Buddha taught specifically to meet the needs of sentient beings. It's interesting when we think about that. Teaching the Dharma is the reason the Buddha became Buddha. It is, when we look at that, the teachings from Dharmakirti and that whole analysis from the Pramanavartika about what makes the Buddha a reliable guide, it starts with that great compassion. The Buddha appears in the world to give the Dharma so that we too can be relieved of all suffering and attain the Buddha state. That's why they come. So the defining characteristic of the Sangha then would be what? They're the ones who have realized the true paths. Yeah. Along the way, they're in the process. They have the direct realization of emptiness, and they are in the process of realizing all of the true paths. So because they're in process, they can both guide us because they're ahead of us on the path, and they also give us an example that it can be done. Venerable Chögyam says they prove the validity and usefulness of everything the Buddha taught. They prove the validity and usefulness of everything the Buddha taught. So by the Sangha, the Arya Sangha, by having taken the steps, having worked through their own doubts and questions, is this possible, enough to the point that they have achieved certain states to prove to themselves by their realizations that things are true, the things the Buddha taught are true, accurate, helpful. They go where the Buddha says they will go. They will relieve that suffering. They will remove the causes of that suffering. They will remove the ignorance that makes us not understand anything, to the point where you become Buddha and understand everything. The Sangha shows that the whole system works. Now, how do we know this with the Sangha? That's a question that's come up a few times. How do we know this? We don't know who's an Arya and who's not. How do we identify? How do we identify this thing? If the Sangha is proving that the Dharma works, that the Buddha's path is true, how do we get it from the Sangha? How does that help? It's okay.
Well, my thinking is that, they're examples. I mean, we watch them like a hawk. They teach us, is the accuracy of what they're teaching us. Are they modeling? Are they integrating? Are they living what they're teaching? Ethical discipline, the 6 far-reaching practices, the qualities of a spiritual mentor have a lot of the same qualities that I would look for in the Sangha as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking for qualities that reassure me that what I'm hearing actually can be embodied.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you're looking at the they is the spiritual mentors that
For me, that's the representation I've got at my level.
Yeah, good. What else, Venerable Jigme?
I think for me to really know this, not only do I look at those that are further along than me, like Venerable Semke was saying, but then when I start noticing that I am emulating, I am little realize what they are doing, then that really is what tells me that I know this, that I am following in the footsteps, that I have the lived experience.
So let me make sure, let me paraphrase and get this, make sure I got it. So that just like Venerable Semge, following our teachers, following the role models we have of those who are spiritual mentors and qualified in that way, when you start to see your own behavior emulate them, then recognizing that they are really guides that are valuable because it's having that effect on you.
Yes, and experiencing the benefit, experiencing the benefit, having more contentment, having a calmer mind, having more concentration, having more ethical discipline, all those things through the practice, through watching the teachers, so like that.
Yeah. Actual physical models that we can see, beings that are in the world. What else? Yeah, Venerable Rinchen.
I think of the masters in the refuge field. You know, I haven't had the opportunity to meet Shantideva, but I can read the text he wrote and see the mental states that he talks about in terms of bodhicitta, in terms of realizing emptiness. And so I see that he is certainly someone far beyond me on the path. And so even though I don't have that personal interaction with him, I can take inspiration from, wow, this is what his mind can imagine and communicate. I can barely understand this when just reading the example. And we could probably say the same for Chandrakirti and Aryadeva, and especially those who wrote the texts on the method side, that the bodhicitta is so amazing. That thinking about how far along they must be on the path.
Yeah. And if you're looking at the Sangha by examining the written word, we have the Arya beings that have been able to give commentary on the Buddha's teachings and share them and re-articulate them in ways that they can still come forward. I mean, Nagarjuna was 1st century, 2nd century, 2,000 years. And that teaching still is moving forward, carried by beings who understand it, who have realized it themselves, who can give commentary and train other people in how to realize it themselves, on and on and on and on and on. So the example of Sangha is not, I think, not just the immediate environment, which we need, but we can also kind of look back in the other direction and go, wow, it's been like that for a long time on this planet. And if we get our mind a little bit bigger, it was on that, like that in other places too, when the other previous Buddhas came. So the wealth of, so it goes all the way from the hugeness of the Dharma legacy that has come to us, right down to a very, very personal and meaningful then experience of, oh, as Venerable Jigme said, I can have a calmer mind too. So it's huge when we think about the Sangha. So those are the distinguishing, defining characteristics of those three. So there's 6 ways that we look at this. The distinction based on their enlightened activities. So the first one, the Buddha gives the transmitted and realizational Dharma. That's the Buddha's enlightening activity. That's pretty literal. The enlightened activity of giving the Dharma produces enlightened beings. Yep. Buddha tells us what to practice, what to abandon, and that is the main thing. We go back to over and over and over. It's reminded, we hear it so many times in so many ways, and I think for me it might get a little bit not brushed aside, but not noted, how the Buddha's enlightening activity is about teaching. Teaching. Not magic, not washing away anything. His Holiness every time these days gives us the quote, the Buddha does not wash away our negativities with water, cannot remove it with his hands, cannot put realizations into our mind. He says it every time. It's through the Buddha's teaching. So that's the enlightened activity of the Buddhas. Transmit the Dharma, and then the enlightened activity of the Dharma is, what would you think? The enlightened activity of the Dharma then is what? Yeah, realizations? Yeah, eliminates the afflictions. It's pretty direct. It eliminates the sufferings. That's an enlightening activity. The Dharma eliminates the afflictions, eliminates the sufferings. So it eliminates the afflictions and it eliminates the seeds. It eliminates the afflictions and it eliminates the results of the afflictions, ultimately. And we can see, too, from the very get-go, we start to apply antidotes. We start to learn there is an antidote to being irritated or to being, heartbroken because our attachment is flaming. We start to apply the antidotes and we see some effect immediately. I shouldn't say immediately because that sets up an expectation that isn't accurate. You can start to see the effect, but as I've told the story many, many times, as Venerable Rabina gave me some sound advice about have some humility. You may be on the cushion and find that antidote is doing really well, and then you stand up and you go right back into the affliction. That can be discouraging. But the point is, on the cushion, you had a moment of relief. And we keep doing it, and we keep doing it, and we keep doing it, and we keep doing it. And we know that all of the afflictions that we learned in the thought training teachers and so forth, Lojong, are temporary, but they calm our minds enough, clear our minds enough to be able to get closer and closer to the ultimate antidote, which is the wisdom realizing the ultimate nature. We can't go straight from being a crazed, wild, samsaric being to realizing emptiness. That just doesn't happen that way. So we apply these other antidotes that we learn as a part of this vast network of the Dharma. So the Dharma eliminates the afflictions and sufferings ultimately. That's its enlightening activity. And then the Sangha, their enlightening activity is to give us encouragement and inspiration and assistance when we practice. So again, we're talking about the Arya Sangha. However, the conventional Sangha is in the process of trying to develop those qualities too. So the third distinction between them is kinds of devotion. The Venerable Children also says the kinds of aspirations, because devotion is not an easy word for some people. So what does that mean, the kinds of devotion, or it's like the way we relate to them? How do we approach them? I looked for synonyms. Okay, what's a synonym for devotion? Admiration, fervor, care, appreciation, fidelity, religious zeal is on the list. There's actually quite a long list of what devotion means. So pick the word that works for you. Devotion, for some people, love devotional things, and it's okay. But for some people, it's like, well, what is that? So it's appreciation. That's a good one. Admiration. Fervor. I like fervor. Enthusiasm for. So we appreciate, this is a direct quote from Lama Tsongkhapa, you should appreciate the Buddha as the one to venerate and serve. So we show respect for the Buddha. We make offerings. We're offering service in ways that support the Buddha or the Buddha's activities, and we practice. And of these three, of the three jewels, in terms of our appreciation, the relationship to the Buddha is more devotional than the other two. You know, Buddhas are persons, Sangha are persons, Dharma is not a person. So this devotion to the person of the Buddha, it's important to understand all those Buddha's qualities in that way. Yeah. Lama Tsongkhapa says you should appreciate the teaching, the Dharma, as that which is to be realized. That's the way to have devotion to the Dharma. That which is to be realized, and the aspiration to do so. Having the aspiration to realize the Dharma. We aspire to put it into practice. We aspire it to transform our minds. So we treasure it. We treasure the Dharma. And that's why we have all these guidelines, which we've talked briefly about, and we'll get to again, about how we respect the Dharma teachings, how we respect the books, how we don't put our malas and glasses even on a Dharma text, recognizing that not that the book itself is anything more than a 29, used to be, how much was this when I got this? $24.95, even when it was a long time ago. Now they're $30 or something, right? So what? The treasure that's in this book is what we're being mindful of and paying respect to. And then third, Lama Tsongkhapa again, you should appreciate the community as those with whom you should associate because they have things that accord with the teaching. Things is not defined. I'm not sure what that translation would be, but I imagine it has to do with that they have realizations or they have behaviors or they have activities that accord with the teaching, accord with the Dharma. So we show our regard by practicing together with the conventional Sangha, joining in their efforts to sustain the Dharma for future generations, and that's for all of our teachers, all of our guides, and the Sangha too. So clearly supporting the Abbey in any way is qualifies as a way of supporting the Dharma, of supporting the Sangha. Okay, so that's the distinctions on how we practice our devotion. And then the fourth one is the distinction based on practice. So the Buddha is our role model of what we want to become. So again, we make offerings. We do prostrations. We show respect to create merit, which is the next one. So again, devotional practices in regard to the Buddha. In relationship to the Dharma, we learn it, we practice it, we meditate on it, and we integrate it with our body, speech, and mind. That's how we practice in relationship to the Dharma, is like we ingest it. We become it as best we can. And then third, in terms of the Sangha, we practice it by practicing harmoniously together with the Sangha. So immediately when I saw this, I thought of the 6 harmonies that we try to live by as a monastic community. Shared requisites, shared precepts, shared, what's the first one? Shared views, shared, we don't harm each other, so we have these, basic 6 things that we do to keep the harmony of the community. I usually know them some days they're out of my head. Yeah, body, speech, and mind, thanks. And we also do this by following the example of the Sangha. So then the 5th distinction is based on recalling the good qualities, because it's called the distinction based on recollection. So it's bringing to mind again and again the specific good qualities of the Buddha, the good qualities of the Dharma, and the good qualities of the Sangha. So in terms of the Buddha, the Lamrim Chenmo again gives a quote that I gave in a couple of weeks ago from a Sangha on the correct compendium of the teachings. These Bhagavan Buddhas possess infinite and limitless good qualities. Just recalling simply that, then we can think about what the list of those good qualities are. So we remember the Buddha is free from all poisonous minds. We remember that the Buddha has wisdom and compassion and that are infinite. The Buddha's mind is omniscient. We remember that the Buddha can lead us to enlightenment. Yeah, the things that most inspire us. When we recall the qualities of the Dharma, the simple statement says we are mindful of the goodness of the Dharma. Now, what does that mean? What do you think? What is the goodness of the Dharma? Venerable Jigme?
For me, what comes to mind is that it's infallible. It never fails. If you practice it properly, it always works.
Good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end, they say. Anything else? Venerable Seppo?
When you think about abandoning afflictions and obscurations, what's left? There's goodness in our mind. There's the natural purity. And also we have to develop good qualities to remove the afflictions. So what's left is goodness.
Yeah. Venerable MK?
Just to continue on with the thinking of Venerable Jigme Venerable Seppo, is to be able to teach us the wisdom to know what to abandon and what to cultivate. There's such a profound goodness in that intention behind the Buddha's teachings. That's what he's giving us, is the wisdom to be able to know that. And as a result, all other things fall into place.
Yeah. I mean, there's the magnificence of the practice of the Dharma as we grow in it, and then the astonishing result. So, yeah, I mean, these are just some ideas of what that is, but it's good to think about, well, what is the goodness of the Dharma? What is that? And how do I hold that? How do I recall that as a basis of practice? So, good to know. So, and then that was the fifth one, right? Yes. The sixth one is the distinction based on how they increase merit. Which right off the bat begs the question, what is merit? Which has come up a few times here in the last short while. So, Samsara Nirvana Buddha Nature, I think, gives a very concise definition. In general, virtuous karma and merit are synonymous. In the context of samsara, they are actions that have the ability to bring favorable results. Calling an action virtuous or meritorious emphasizes that it is psychologically healthy and ethically irreproachable. So if you call it virtuous karma, then it is also then the seeds of virtue that is on our mind. We're generating merit. We're generating merit in order to clear the way to create positive results. Positive results, which we get into in karma, of course, but these positive results that open the doorway for us to be able to understand the Dharma, to be more receptive, to have the conditions for practicing the Dharma, including being fed and, all the worldly things that come from virtuous karma. But the enriched direction that we want to point our virtue is towards being able to continue to meet the teachings, particularly in fortunate rebirths, one after another, after another, after another, until we're able to direct our rebirth so that we can continue to practice on the path. So in terms of the Buddha, we create merit by offering and prostrating to the Buddha. We create merit by offerings. The more our mind is absorbed in the offering, in the act of offering, the more powerful, deeper, richer the merit that we're accumulated. So, we can throw a few crackers up there, and that's one thing. And we can actually pause, take a notice of what we're doing, do it with the intention, doing with a visualization of the Buddha, doing it with some aspiration about what the result might be, and so forth and so forth. We can really use that. And here we have so many opportunities to create merit in this way. Everybody does. Anywhere, anytime you can make these offerings. But here we have special reminders and rotas and so forth. So if we're not making offerings just because it's my turn to do it, but because we have a real wish to venerate the Buddha or to generate, merit in relationship to that, that's good. To the Dharma, we gain merit by putting it into practice in our own mind. My guess is that is the most vividly apparent to people. It is to me. When we are putting the practice, the Dharma, into our own mind, again, as Venerable Jigme said, we experience these as a result. We can tell, oh, this is a result, or even this pleasant mind state, instead of being, flipped out over things. That's a difference. And you can say, oh, that, because why do we have a pleasant mind, or why do we have an unpleasant mind? Where does that come from? Ripening of karma, these unpleasant feelings, right? We can make it worse or better by the way we turn our mind, but the arising of a negative or of a painful feeling comes from karma. And the arising from a virtuous feeling comes from karma, chiefly. Not a virtuous feeling, a pleasant feeling, chiefly. So, the Sangha, we create merit by doing virtuous activities together with them, making offerings to them, and offering respect to the Sangha. So this brings up the issue of what we talk about, the power of the object, especially in terms of the Buddha. That because the Buddha, so he has explained, because the Buddha takes so much merit to become Buddha, to realize, to abandon everything that needs to be abandoned, to realize everything that needs to be realized. The package of merit is unimaginable. And so the quality of the object that represents the Buddha and various aspects of the three jewels, two kastupas count. Well, that's the Buddha's mind, yeah. So that represent the Buddha also have some power, not from their own side per se, but like, I think of the story of, did this come up during this time? Yes, about the fly on the cow dung circulating the stupa in the middle of a moat, right? The old, for those who don't remember or weren't here, the old man, 100 years old or more, so wanted to ordain, and even the most advanced of the Buddha's disciples could not see that he had the merit to do that. But the Buddha could see way back when, in a previous life, this old human at this time had been a fly who landed on a piece of cow dung that was floating around a moat that happened to be in a water flow that circulated a stupa, which is the representation of the Buddha's holy mind. that merit was not created because the fly was on dung. That merit was created in relationship to, quote, the power of the object, which represents the Buddha's holy mind, because of the collection of merit that is a part of what is Buddha, right? So I think it's important. I mean, they say that even if you're angry in front of a Buddhist statue, I mean, you have the negativity of being angry, but you also have made contact with the Buddha, and that plants also some good seeds in your mind. So that we have precepts, which we'll talk to about so not in any way denigrating images of the Buddha, even if the workmanship is not so great, that we never criticize the statue or the painting. You can say, well, the workmanship is not so skillful, but to honor any images of the Buddha in particular, the holy beings, in order to not create negativity in relationship to them, and to take advantage of the fact that remembering to prostrate or bow or nod to the holy beings all around us also creates good imprints in our mind. So it's not magic. It's not magic. This is still, we're following the law of cause and effect. Yeah.
Can you unpack a little bit more how the power of the object is not from the side of the object inherently in the object?
No. I really struggle with this. Samsara Nibbana Buddha nature again says, for ordinary beings, the only karma, no, this wasn't in the book. This was Venerable Children's teaching. For ordinary beings, the only karma we create that isn't typical true dukkha, because all of our virtuous actions are veiled by ignorance, is that which is done by the power of the object. Holy objects, places, and people. So I don't really understand how this works, but more and more, and maybe if somebody does, I'm happy to have that explained. Yeah, Tenzin, what do you think? No, you're just yawning. Okay. But it does have to do with the collection of merit is so potent. And then, we consecrate these. Last night with Tara, we invite the Buddha into the image. Is the Buddha inherently in the image? No. Is that so in our mind? Yes. Yes. When we see that representation of Tara, is it Tara any more than I put on a dress with the green something something and a tiara, and am I Tara? No. But the collection of those qualities represented by that statue and our recognition of it has a power. And that's all I can say. You don't take me?
You know, what comes to mind is, I don't remember what the name of that movie was, but Lama Zopa Rinpoche that took some people to Tibet, and all of those stories about high practitioners starting to see the statues talking and talking directly to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, to me, is the power of the object. And why? To me, it's because that mind is purified enough to start tapping into that. So it doesn't matter that the object is just a metal statue or whatever. It is the power of the purified mind that is tapping into the power of the object. So to be able to do that has so much to do with the person.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
That's how I think of it. I don't know.
Yeah. Venerable Children said, when you go to a big teaching and you have many practitioners, where they are now, soon, you have many practitioners all around you, you feel inspired. We've all probably at one time or another sat in a very big audience of teachings, and with His Holiness, there's like thousands and thousands and thousands. And everybody is so devoted. You can just feel this quality of devotion and joy. She said, think if they were all the Sangha jewel who had realized emptiness. So just imagine that. So it is also the turning of, as Venerable Chigme is saying, even for us ordinary beings who don't have that realization, it is the turning of our own mind that also has to be receptive, and I think also magnifies that power, quote, the power of the object. And, we've said again and again, our minds are too gross, too crass for the Buddhas to be able to communicate with us directly. We're just not refined enough to hit it, to hear it, to get it, to see it. We have the story of a Sangha who was very far along the path and still meditated 12 years before Maitreya appeared to him. So what do we have? We have paintings. We have statues. We have things like that remind us of the Buddha's qualities, that are representations of the Buddha's qualities. I've heard Robert Thurman even say that there is a kind of emanation body that is the statue, or some suggestion of that. I should be careful because I don't want to, without a direct quote, I shouldn't quote him. But it for me, it was reassuring. It's like, okay, the Buddhas do communicate even through the work personship of artisans who are trained to bring these Buddha images to life, who also have the karma to bring these Buddha's images to life. And then they're endowed with people's prayers and people's, over time. I mean, even look at our meditation hall. None of us actually wants to give it up, even though we need the Buddha hall, because so much meditation has gone in there, so many ordinations have happened in there. The space is imbued with qualities of holy practice. Now, is that just our mind? I mean, people come in off the street, we give them a tour, they come in, they go, oh, so peaceful. I don't know. But once someone has made intentionally a statue, for example, of the Buddha, and imbued that with their own devotion, watch how Peter Griffin works, for example. Imbued that with their own devotion, imbued that with centuries of understanding of what the Buddha image is, and then the Buddha's wish to communicate through us through every means that is possible. Why would that not be? Yeah, Venerable Tarpa has thought about this power of the object we have. Yeah.
I just have what I was thinking of when you were just speaking was that in the commentaries to the Pali Canon, we hear about the 5 kinds of causality. And we don't actually think much about the last one, which is the Dhammic or Dharma causality, which they describe as what you read in the sutras about the earth trembling and shaking when somebody becomes arhat or something like that. But Bhikkhu Bodhi, when he speaks about it, he says, well, also I think that Dhammic, in the Pali, causality has to do with our practice, with the changes that happen in our mind. So for me, well, Darshan Rinpoche told me a long time ago that these statues, they're just made out of metal. We imbue them with meaning. So for me, all of it is like our meditation hall. There's a lot of kinds of causality that have happened there. And some of them we've created, and some of what we've created, I think, is Dhammic causality. So I think it's just maybe more subtle than my mind can usually grok with any kind of substance. So, but I do think, like Venerable, things aren't mysteries. There's causality. We just don't understand it all. In that sense, if it's caused, it can't be inherently existent.
Yeah.
Going back to the original part of how this discussion started.
Yeah.
There's nothing inherent in those logs out there that makes them anything, you know.
Yeah. But which also brings to mind, I mean, the other powerful objects, among the other powerful objects are our teachers and our parents even. So it's also the kindness that we have received from these beings that elevates them as being very powerful objects that we create merit in relationship to because of their role in our lives. Yeah, Venerable.
So from volume 1, Broaching the Buddhist Path, His Holiness and Venerable write, in statements about the effects of our interactions with Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and their images, the heaviness of the karma is primarily due to what is called the power of the object. That is, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are remarkable beings who have accumulated merit for countless eons and have continually engaged in benefiting sentient beings. Venerating such beings, making offerings to them, assisting them in their various works creates powerful karma because being weighty in virtue, holy beings are powerful objects. It doesn't specifically say how does that transfer to an object, but that's a representation.
Yeah. Yeah, nice. Thank you. Thank you for finding that.
We talk about how the objects are conventionally designated by the mind, and what we perceive is very much influenced by what other people believe around us. So even if we walked into a temple, we had no knowledge of Buddhism, and we saw the Buddha statue, it wouldn't really mean much to us. But if somebody came by and explained to us what it actually meant, then it takes on the significance. So it's like if other people believe this object has value, then we're much more likely to believe that too. So that's maybe where this other power is lingering. It's in the beliefs of other sentient beings, is one way you could look at it.
Yes, and I've seen people walk up to a Buddha who've never seen a Buddha before, and they're immediately struck, astonished, overwhelmed. I've seen it happen in our meditation hall. We get people from, just coming up to visit. Oh, no, we've got a monastery up here. How cool. Right? Those are seeds in their own minds. Those are seeds in their own minds that are getting triggered by that. So whether that came from a supported belief previously or not, that seed is in them, or they wouldn't be responding in that way. Yeah, so it's probably both true. Yeah, one more.
I remember that many years back, a meditation teacher pointed out to a meditator that having difficulties of meditating, and then the teacher just said, go and do work, go and do offering service. And they come back, and there is an extreme stabilization in the meditation, in the clarity and so forth. So offering service, and that actually struck my mind because if I clean my own toilet, I don't have this kind of activities like, clarity. But when I clean the toilet of temple, subsequently when I go and listen to teachings and so forth, it reminds me on the 6 preparatory practices. It's like, wow, it creates extreme stabilization, clarity of the mind. And then that also reminds me on one offering that placement of the ripening fruits with an unripened fruit, it will ripen the fruit. It actually appeared in my mind as a whole. By engaging the awakening activities of the Buddha will catalyze our awakening activities.
Oh, nice. Yeah, thanks. Wholesome.
Well, it's true that, that we imbue things into the statues and symbolism. And it's true that that when we turn our mind towards those objects, we're creating a lot of virtue. But in the story with the monk, there is no indication that the fly even looked at the stupa.
That's true.
There is no indication the fly was doing any kind of imputing on that stupa, but that there was a power there that drew that monk to want to be, that man to want to become a monk later in another life. So we're talking about something that's beyond all these things.
Yeah, and this thing about, I think Venerable Tarpa also reiterated too, is this thing about the merit that is accumulated in order to be able to become a Buddha, that any representation of it has some merit. I mean, it comes with that somehow. So that's all I know about that one. So we're going to go to two more things here, and then we're not going to get our discussion again, but thank you, everyone. So those are the ways of taking refuge by knowing the distinctions between the objects. So they're really juicy to meditate on. These, they're helpful. All of them are actually. Why am I promoting one over the other? So then there's two more little brief short outlines about how to take refuge. One is going for refuge through commitment. Venerable Chögyam translated this as going for refuge as seeing the refuge objects as ideals, which is quite different from commitment in my mind. So I'm not quite sure where that came from, and I could not find where she was coming from with that, but that's just a question to put out for research as people are doing reading. But through commitment, Lama Tsongkhapa says, going for refuge through commitment means upholding the Buddha as the teacher of refuge. And then Venerable's translation makes sense. It's holding the Buddha as ideal. Accepting the Buddha as the ideal teacher. And that takes us back to the analogy of the doctor. The Buddha, the ideal teacher, is the doctor. Then the teaching that the Buddha gives is the actual refuge. And Venerable says it's the ideal refuge because it frees us from all suffering. It is the medicine, the ideal medicine. And then Lama Tsongkhapa says the community, commitment to the community is the community who assists us to attain refuge. That's also very clear. And then the ideal, the Sangha is ideal as the ideal example, the ideal friends that help us on the path. So they're back to the analogy of the nurses, of how the Sangha supports us to take the medicine that the Buddha gives in order to be healed of what? Our ignorance, our craving, the things that keep us in samsara. And then the last point of these 8 is taking refuge by not speaking in favor of other refuges. So those 6 about the distinctions is a sub-point of these 8 points about how to take refuge, right? So 8, taking refuge by not speaking in favor of other refuges. So this is the literal words here. And, it's keeping your refuge clean and clear, being clear in yourself that your refuge is in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Because if we're indecisive or we're wavering or we're not sure, or maybe I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, but I'm still not sure what they are, or maybe I am, but also I still love Jesus, and is that okay? We won't get very far in our practice until we have really gotten clear that my refuge is in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. And you can see why. Then there's always some doubt, there's always some equivocation, there's always, is there something better? Is there some other way to do this? So it is not to say in any way that we denigrate. In fact, we have other precepts that really forbid this, that we denigrate other spiritual traditions. And we don't promote the Buddha Dharma as the savior of the world and that everybody should do it. But we know it is what's our refuge, our personal refuge. And as we all know, His Holiness has made great effort to make sure, and says it again and again and again, that we understand that every religion exists in order to benefit other beings, and it is effective in that way, all the ones that are. And so to appreciate and value those and to find the commonalities we have with other religions. And it's also behind what he has said, I'm sure many of us have heard him say again and again. In general, his recommendation is that people stick with the religion they were born into, so as not to have confusion. And every time I heard him say that, there's a part of me that goes, right? And then at the end, he usually says, not always, says, and if you feel that you have an affinity for Buddhism and your religion of origin does not work for you, then yes, it's fine to be Buddhist. But I do think it is really on this point of the confusion of making sure that our refuge is in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And I personally, this is just me personally talking, although we've talked about this for a long time with Venerable children too, I think those of us who are Western Buddhists, a huge part of our practice is to undo what we were conditioned with from the beginning. Whether we were raised in a heavily religious family, and that's one thing, and it's obvious. It's actually more helpful because you can see what the messages were. But even if you were not raised in a heavily religious family, our culture is soaked in it. Our literature is filled with biblical references that if you have an education at all, that's what you learn. Or a liberal arts education anyway. I don't know what they're doing in science, but they're probably not referring to King David so much. So we really need to look again and again and again at where our mind is taking us with regard to our religion of origin and with regard to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And it doesn't happen overnight. It's not like you can't be a Buddhist until you clean out all your stuff. But I mean, I still see sometimes after, and I've worked on it really intentionally for a long time, but sometimes I think, oh, whoa, that's an old one. And it doesn't apply here in this situation. So it's very important. Venerable gave a really good suggestion about how to practice with this. It'd be very helpful to think about the founder of that religion and think about what their qualities were. Look at the teachings and think about what the teachings were. What was the path? What was the path that original founder laid out? What was the community around them? So comparing. Founder Buddha, founder somebody else. Teaching Buddha, teachings of the Buddha, the Dharma, teachings of somebody else. Community, Sangha, realized Sangha of the Buddha, Sangha of somebody else. Just compare them, dot by dot, and weigh the values that you learn. And there's some places that are certainly, we will find places where they are very much in common. And there are places we'll find where they very much are not. And we have to, we get to choose which one is the one that we take refuge in. I've met many people who call themselves Christian Buddhists or Jewish Buddhists, and that is totally workable in some ways. It's totally workable and His Holiness always says this when he teaches, so does Venerable children often. If there are things that you learn from the Buddha Dharma that are beneficial in your life, use them. Freely given, joyfully given. Use them in ways that make your life more meaningful or richer or that work for you. And you don't have to become Buddhist to do that. You don't have to, but once we decide that this is the path I want, then taking clear, I mean, this is the, not just the one I want, this is the one that makes sense to me because of I've analyzed what fulfills my spiritual longing and what makes sense to me. Then we get very clear about what our refuge is in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. And that's part of the beauty of these kinds of lists to analyze and think about. This is what I take refuge in. This is what I take refuge in, and this is the result. This is a result I've known from experience, from my own experience, I can say. And this is a result that is offered. It's what the Buddha taught is the ultimate result of this practice. And I have probably enough hints that until I have the direct realization of it that proves it ultimately, I have enough hints to keep going. I have enough hints to keep going. So this is a good one. Well, they all are. What am I saying? It's a good one to think about, though. And it's really good to think about while we're doing the refuge practice. I like this. This is very cool to compare if that's issues for us. Okay, we're not going to get to the guidelines for practice or the precepts of practice today. I thought we would. Yes, Venerable Thubten.
Kind of two questions to what you just talked about. I guess the first one is where you started out the teaching on making a connection to what we're saying, our prayers and stuff. And I've been wondering how much can we deviate in, instead of just doing our formulated refuge prayer, of actually putting that to my own words. And then that, I guess it slips into the, like what you just said about take what you find is meaningful from your religion. And I mean, I'm 100% Buddhist, but I'm realizing I have more Christian influences, and wondering, it's a interesting, I don't know, mix of opening up to prayer and using my own words and connecting with the Buddha. But I see that comes from a Christian influence, so it gets, I don't know, confusing, I guess.
Yeah, so in answer to your first question, I've heard Venerable Children say many times, yes, write these in your own words for your own practice. I mean, don't then try to think the whole community should take them on, but you know, prayers that, or verses that use the words that are meaningful for you, making sure you follow the points, right? This other thing about prayer and the Buddha and so forth, I can only respond from my own experience. I went through a period where I was so afraid that I was seeing Buddha as God that I kind of shut it off. It was like, everything is all logic. If I can't prove it logically, then there's something wrong with me, you know. And I really cut that emotional connection. I'm not sure I can say, given who I was and what I was and where I was at the time, that it was a mistake per se. But there came a point where I had to go back and then, like, okay, then what is my devotion? What am I devoted to? How do I think about that? And it was very fruitful to have to answer that question, to look at what I understood about the teachings on dependent arising and the emptiness, to look at what the Buddha's method was, to look at what a Buddha would be if a Buddha was not a permanent holy being that always existed since the beginningless time, and to get super clear about that as much as I'm capable of in my understanding. So I don't recommend shutting off, because that wasn't so helpful. It was a pretty dry and sad time during my practice. But we have dry times, and we have to wrestle with these things. Yeah, so that's the best I can say from my own experience. Does anybody else have any?
My only addition or to enhance is to make sure that we come to the right conclusion.
Yes, thank you.
That's, and if you come out of it with a feeling of clarity or some sort of cognizance that you're heading in the right direction, then however way in which we talk to ourselves or talk to the three jewels is, not irrelevant, but it needs to be uniquely our own, but it's got to come to the right conclusion.
Yeah, that's really important. Thank you so much. Yes.
There was one in the Sutra of Golden Light, the last chapter, about 2 pages.
In what?
The Sutra of Golden Light.
The Sutra of Golden Light.
And it's basically this longing prayer by a goddess bodhisattva, where it's talking about falling down on her knees, repeatedly sobbing for the leader, longing to see the wish of the Buddha. And it's so dramatic and, like anxious to see the Buddha, and using very emotional words. And before us, I'm like, what is this? But at another time, it's like, wow, it's like, we're full of these longing emotions and this need for emotional connection that's not directed towards ordinary sentient beings, but it's directed towards the three jewels, and funnel that sense of longing and aspiration, inspiration, intensity towards what we're wanting to become. And so then it made more sense to me. So I think, we're visual, or we're sense-based creatures, so then we have sense-based things to direct us towards what we can't see. So then this prayer, as long as it's heading towards the right conclusion, not that there's this person out there that's going to save us, then I think it has its place.
Yeah, definitely. And, we talked from the beginning about we have to have relationship. It's about, this whole practice is about building relationship with Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And we're ordinary emotional beings. And, answering the question, can you be attached to the Buddha? Well, there are ways that our attachment can certainly get in the way of our longing for the Buddha. But the Buddha is a very pure object, right? So just like that, taking that whole empty hole that's craving to be loved off of all the people we lay it on, and then turn it to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, how safe could that be? Like perfect. And knowing, again, but with that understanding of the right conclusion, that our fulfillment of that comes from our own generating bodhicitta and our own realization to become that Buddha. Yeah. So since we didn't get to it, I want to draw everybody's attention to it. Our little Pearl of Wisdom prayer books are treasuries of Dharma. Sometimes we just get doing the same prayers that we do, and we don't look through them very clearly, but there are here the guidelines for refuge practice are in this book, and some of the precepts that go along with it. So we'll start here and do some of those next week, because they give us, again, guidelines for how we practice. And though, we are used to formally taking precepts by taking 8 Mahayana precepts, or taking the 5 lay precepts, or taking our monastic precepts. These also come from Sangha, and also from the Kadampa Geshis, of guidelines for how to practice. So we'll do that next week. Okay, let's take one moment to reflect. And really dedicate for our own capacity, our own understanding of our capacity to grow, to become Buddha. Dedicate that the merit of his practice will lead to ripening in all the conditions necessary to help us achieve that wish. And as we say, and as we enter Varsa, may this situation come about for all sentient beings. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May the born have no decline, but increase forevermore.